43 million ballots are going to be mailed across the nation. What can go wrong, right? What can go wrong when you send 43 million ballots? In California, the president talks about election day. We may not know who won on election day. In California, where Judicial Watch successfully sued to stop a plan that Gavin Newsom had to mail ballots to people who may have moved away and died. First up, though, and I'll bring in maybe the coronavirus discussion here as well, is the debate about our election systems and whether, as President Trump has suggested, vote by mail will undermine clean elections. He raised the question because he's been following the left's arguments pretty closely, and more honestly, frankly, than his left-wing media critics, that he raised the question, should the elections be delayed until we can vote safely and securely? Now, he just raised the question. Now, he is actually, in my view, holding the left accountable for its own rhetoric, which I've highlighted to you has been reckless and irresponsible by suggesting you'll die if you vote in person. If that's the case, then why have elections? If that's the crisis. That's the question the president's asking. Do I think we need to delay the elections? No. I do think we need to encourage people to vote in person, because relying on the mails to vote is not the best way to ensure, most specifically, that your vote will be counted. Voter fraud, obviously, the risk is increased dramatically when you have tens of millions of ballots being mailed to voters across the land. As we pointed out, and as I pointed out on behalf of Judicial Watch in sworn testimony to Congress, the Baker-Carter Commission, which was a commission named after James Baker, the famous Republican aide to Ronald Reagan, a former Secretary of Treasury, and Jimmy Carter, the former president, acknowledged that vote by mail increases the likelihood of fraud. It's harder to contain and check fraud with vote by mail. I mean, obviously, it stands to reason if you don't vote in a polling place under the watchful eyes of government and political officials, because the parties get to monitor the polls as well, or representatives of the candidates in most circumstances, the opportunities for fraud dramatically increase. And as importantly, even if fraud is not an issue, the ability to mess with your vote increases. So to get your ballot from point A to point B, or even point B to point C, obviously raises additional hurdles to having your vote counted. And we've had instances in New York. We have New York. They still haven't figured out a month after primaries who won, because they were overwhelmed with vote by mail and mail-in ballots. And the ballots that have been sent in, many have been thrown out because of many rules weren't kept. Either they weren't signed, or they weren't postmarked properly, or whatever. Now, do you want that to happen to your vote? Of course you don't. If you can go shop, if you can go protest, you can go vote. So rather than delaying elections, we have to stop the rhetoric that you can only vote by mail. That's the safest way to vote. I mean, obviously, if you never leave your house, well, I don't know if you'll ever leave your house, you're actually better off than going out and voting, because this is all just junk voodoo science. But vote on election day. What's so hard about that? And don't let the left scare you from voting on election day. But right now, we've set up a system, thanks to the left, which I think benefits from, wants to be able to benefit from the voter fraud that will result, and from upending our election systems. Because remember, this isn't about just 2020. It's about every future election after 2020. The goal of the left is to increase opportunities for fraud. How do I know that? Because all of their proposals increase the opportunity for fraud. They want vote by mail, which increases the opportunity for fraud. They oppose voter ID, They oppose cleaning up election rolls like Judicial Watch is trying to do. And now we're engaged, thanks to leftist scare mongering, in an unprecedented experiment that we're going to find out whether it works or not on election day. And what is the experiment? We are mailing 43 million ballots at least in the mails. That means that ballots are going to go out to whoever, presumably registered citizens, but of course, no one really is able to check that well. Oh, you may think that citizens can only register to vote. Well, that's the law, but no one checks to make sure that when someone signs the registration form and they say they are a citizen, no one checks that. There's no citizenship verification. 43 million ballots are going to be mailed across the nation. What can go wrong, right? What can go wrong when you send 43 million ballots? In California, the president talks about election day. We may not know who won on election day. In California, where Judicial Watch successfully sued to stop a plan that Gavin Newsom had to mail ballots to people who may have moved away and died. We got that cut out, but they're still going to be mailing millions of ballots. They plan to, and they will, under law, keep on counting votes until at least 17 days after the election. Their thinking is if you get the ballot in on election day, you can mail the ballot on election day. They're obligated to count it as far as 17 days out. So we may not know who won the election on election day. And it's not just the president, the presidential contest. There are Senate contests, there are House contests, and all up and down the ballot, as you know. And those contests are going to probably even be more significantly impacted. This is why I've been warning about it. I testified about it. Judicial Watch has been highlighting this. We've highlighted the fact that many voting rolls are filthy. In California, they're removing up to 1.6 million inactive names thanks to a Judicial Watch settlement agreement. Now we're told those names won't get ballots. But the point is, when you've got admittedly dirty names on the list, it suggests there are other problems. Other states, we're not assured ineligible voters won't get the names, the rolls, ballots or ballot applications. There's this famous story that I've highlighted on my Twitter feed where a cat received an absentee ballot application or a ballot application. And the cat's dead for 12 years. That's the sort of opportunity for fraud and shenanigans and misconduct that it can occur when you have massive efforts to vote by mail and send ballots out without any real security checks. I mean, as it is, too many people vote by mail. It's not a secure way to vote. To a degree, it is secure. It's not secure enough, in the sense that there are states that have absentee ballot requirements that require some sort of identification be attached or some certification in the form of another witness confirming that that's the person who's signing on to it. But it exposes your vote to be, your signature is attached to your vote when you mail and vote in some locations. What happens to the privacy of your vote in those circumstances? Or is it as assured as it would be if you went to vote on election day at a polling place? No, of course not. So I don't know what's going to happen on election day. I know there's going to be more chaos than normal. I know that there's going to be increased fraud necessarily because we're relying more on a process that is susceptible to fraud. We have NPR talking about potentially, they went through and looked at states, 1% of ballots were thrown out. NPR, don't believe me, look it up. You want to be part of the 1%? In New York, 20% of the ballots, the numbers are supposedly, are being tossed aside. Imagine the litigation over that during a presidential contest. The president's right to be concerned. Now, can the election be delayed? Yes, it can. Of course, a law needs to be passed by Congress, I think, in order to do so, but it's technically possible. It's not constitutionally impermissible to change the election day. Practically speaking, I don't think it's going to fix the issue of this push for mail-in ballots. As long as we keep on pushing mail-in ballots, we're still going to have this chaos and potential fraud, no matter when the election happens. And I said it once and I'll say it again, President Trump and every other politician who's out there who's acting behavior, who thinks they need to be responsible or should be responsible, they should be encouraging people to vote in person. It's the best way to vote. And Judicial Watch is doing what it can to ensure that the lists are cleaner. We filed lawsuits in Pennsylvania and North Carolina. We found in those two states alone, there are upwards of 2 million. It's almost nearly 2 million extra names on the rolls. Just and the good news is even a warning letter to one county in Pennsylvania, Allegheny County, resulted in that county removing 69,000 names from the rolls. Now the left will say, well, those are names that are, quote, inactive. Well, A, that's not entirely clear, and B, inactive voters are registered to vote, and that's a pool from which fraudsters can draw. That's why the law requires the list be clean. Dirty voting rolls can mean dirty elections. And in 2019, we did a study. I'm sure the numbers have changed since then. Probably not too much for the better. 2.5 million extra names on the rolls. And that's a kind of a very narrow analysis, meaning those were names there were counties that had more people on the rolls than were eligible to vote. So that was just over 100%. So the number is even probably bigger than that. $43 million ballots are going to be mailed without you asking for them, or any other voter asking for them. And that just doesn't count those who because they've been scared from voting in person, ask for ballots and then have them sent. And I don't know how many that's going to be. And the left, as I said, they don't want to upend, they don't want to make it, they don't want to have any serious checks on people who mail in ballots. They say there'll be signature verification. Oh, please. That and a quarter still won't get you a cup of coffee. In many ways, the train has left the station. These ballots are going to go out. What we can do is pressure states, as Judicial Watch is doing through its educational efforts and obviously legal efforts, to clean up the rolls as best they're able under law now. I mean, for instance, in Pennsylvania, I was talking to a reporter for the Washington Post, and I learned from him, and this is what I quote him, he gave me a quote responding to it, that Pennsylvania isn't cleaning up its list, and at least some counties in Pennsylvania aren't cleaning up their lists. They stopped doing it. So if you're dead and moved away, they're not, and they know about it, they still may not be cleaning up their lists. That's deeply disturbing. Again, I'm gonna highlight the fact I got a book coming out, and it's because it's important. I want to raise it. A Republic Under Assault. A Republic Under Assault. Our elections are fundamental to our constitutional republic. Don't you agree? And they are being undermined in unprecedented ways now. What's going on is a revolution against the rule of law on elections. You got the rioting in the streets. They're trying to burn down courthouses. Well, they're also trying to blow up our election systems. Our system can't handle 43 million ballots in the mail. It can't. New York has shown that. And it's a primary. So let's clean up the rolls as best we're able. And let's have, across the board, every politician, every civic leader in America encourage people to show up and vote in person to mitigate and dissuade people from voting by mail unnecessarily. Absentee ballots are to be used in emergency situations. And the left says, well, the military votes by mail. Of course they do. They're deployed overseas. Are they suggesting they shouldn't be able to? It's the exception that proves the rule. Vote by mail was so difficult for the military, they had to pass a separate law to ensure the military is able to vote easily when they're deployed overseas or elsewhere. We have tens of millions of aliens here in the United States, tens of millions. I don't want to wed myself to a particular number, but let's say it's 40 million. And I mean aliens who are lawfully present here and those who are illegal aliens. Of course they register to vote. Of course they vote. We can only argue about how many of them do it. No citizenship verification. Most states have either no voter ID at all or inadequate voter ID. Only 10 or 11 states have strong voter ID laws. Many states, you may think your state has a voter ID law, but most states have no real bar to voting if you show up without an ID. It's so lax, or the acceptable ID is so broad that they may as well not have voter ID at all. Now, of course, to be fair, even going through the motions of asking for voter ID in many ways is better than no voter ID. But major states like California, of course, which is mailing out I don't know how many millions of ballots to people unasked. New Jersey, New York, Illinois. Here in the District of Columbia, there's no voter ID requirement. 15 big states have no voter ID. 33 or so states, 35 states have kind of okay to substandard voter ID requirements, and only 10 or 11 states have strong voter ID requirements. Does that make sense? Now, it's probably about 25 states have, it's not 35 states, 25 states have okay voter ID requirements, 10 have good ones, and as I said, the 15 don't have any voter ID requirements at all. So millions of people don't have to show their ID to vote. Do you think that's okay? Does that reassure you that elections will be clean and fair in those localities? Of course not. And the left likes to pretend there's no voter fraud or it's not substantial. I don't know about you, but even one vote in a close contest can make or break a race. And I don't want my vote to be stolen. You want your vote to be stolen? Of course not. Negated by someone who votes illegally? And of course, the reason we have these rules is to reassure people that the elections are clean and they can participate. When you have the perception, because of garbage rules, that elections are rigged, it will depress voter turnout. How do I know that? Because when they increase security for elections, this information or the data shows that voter turnout increases. because people recognize, hey, now they've got some checks in place. My vote's more likely to count and not be stolen, or it won't matter if it, it's more likely to matter. So Judicial Watch is actually in court trying to ensure clean elections. We're educating the American people to ensure clean elections, but the left is suppressing the vote by scaring people from voting in person. The left is undermining clean elections by trying to take away the few rules in place to ensure that mail-in ballots or absentee ballots are secure, certified, and have identities associated with them. Chaos on election day. That's what I'm concerned about. So keep track of what Judicial Watch is doing. We've testified to Congress about it. We're in litigation about it. We're educating people about it. And the left, they try to shut us down. They try to get us censored online on election issues. It's unbelievable. We're experts on election law. We're experts on election processes. We've got one of the highest quality teams legally in that area in the country. And we do it with your support, and I appreciate that. And along those lines, we've been out there trying to defend the rule of law and protect voter ID laws. We've I think we filed like half a dozen amicus briefs in North Carolina, but the left-wing courts in North Carolina